Hi, everyone. Welcome to From Guesswork to Ground Truth, a programmatic approach to share of shelf. My name is Lisa Johnston. I am the editorial director at the Path to Purchase Institute and Consumer Goods Technology. You may be joining us also from Progressive Grocer or Convenience Store News, both of which are sister brands under the Ensemble IQ umbrella. So I'm very excited to welcome all of you here today. We are going to get started in just a couple minutes. While we wait for a few more people to join us, I just need to cover a few housekeeping items. So first, while the materials in this webcast have been reviewed by our editorial staff, the views of the speakers and their organization are their own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of our brands or Ensemble IQ. So we want this webinar to be as interactive as possible. So please use the Q&A function to ask questions throughout the entire session. You can find that on the left side of your screen. We are going to have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of our conversation, and our speaker may follow up by email after the session concludes if there are any questions that we don't have time to get to. That area is also where you can submit any technical questions or any feedback, and you will get a direct reply from our webinar producer. Finally, if you want to review the webinar later, or if you want to share it with a colleague, a replay will be available today on p2pi.com. Okay, so that does it for housekeeping. I'm excited to get started today. So for years, share of shelf has been an important and a misunderstood metric in retail and consumer goods. Sounds straightforward, but in practice, everyone seems to define it differently. And so without a shared standard, teams spend a lot of valuable time reconciling conflicting data instead of focusing on improving execution. This lack of alignment makes it even more difficult for brands and retailers to fully trust what they're seeing. So in this discussion, we're going to take a closer look at what share of shelf really means today and why there's so much variation. We're going to talk about how retail's evolution, what that's meant for older measurement methods, and what it will take to move forward toward a more consistent, a more data-driven approach. And finally, we're going to explore how better shelf visibility and collaboration can strengthen the connection between what happens in store and how shoppers make their choices. So I'm excited. I want to welcome Bram Warshafsky of Storesight for today's discussion. Bram is Chief Product Officer, and he has a really terrific view of why this topic is so important at retail and CPG. So Bram, welcome.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks for having us.
No, it's great to have you. Why don't you just kick us off? Tell us just a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your role, and just a little bit about Storesight.
Yeah, so I started my career in consumer packaged goods. I was brand manager for a couple of years. And one of the things that always stood out to me was the importance of doing store checks. Everyone kind of told me how important it was to just get out in the wild and see what my shoppers were seeing. And anytime I did them, I'd come away with like incredible insights around out of stocks, adjacencies, pricing, competitive activity, you name it. The problem was I just didn't do it that often because I was pretty busy at my desk and it was hard to find an afternoon to go around. And even if I did do it, it was kind of the same 2 or 3 stores across the street from the office over and over again. And I just kind of thought, it'd be awesome if I could do store walks from my desk, on my laptop, if I could fly across the country and if I could time travel to see the evolution of the planogram and maybe over time build an AI to help me out, that'd be pretty cool. So I ended up starting a company called Shelfgram. We partnered with the team at Field Agent to source photos from across North America. And after a couple of years, we decided, we should really be one company. So in 2024, Shelfgram was acquired by Field Agent, and we've since rebranded to Storesight to vertically integrate those 2 technologies. And that's really the focus of my role at the company.
Great. That's great. That's some great context and background for this conversation. Certainly the Path to Purchase Institute team understands what a challenge it is to get into different stores on wide geographies, but just how important it really is to see, to have a broad view of what's occurring at retail on the shelves. Want to set the stage. Let's talk about share of shelf. I mean, really just even a basic definition of what that means today. And then really also want to talk about why it's so different. Why are there so many different ways that companies are defining it and calculating it?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned in your intro, it does seem sort of simple. It's just the percentage of visible, space that a brand has within a category. But of course, the nuance there is, how do we define the category? Where does it start? Where does it end? There are many different set sizes and formats. So when we're talking about share shelf, what's the level of aggregation? Are we counting based on the facing, so individual product units on the shelf, or based on space, like how much kind of square footage it has. In some categories, those are interchangeable, and others they're not. If you think about something like cat food, you might have kind of big boxes and bags next to small little pâtés. Do you think about vertically stacked items as one unit, as multiple? So the challenge is we don't really have a good industry standard. And then on top of that, you have to wrestle with things like out of stocks, distribution, lows, non-compliance. But essentially, there's 3 different ways of calculating share of shelf. So I think we should just kind of chat through each one and what some of the pros and cons are.
Sounds great.
So the one that people are most probably familiar with are just looking at the planogram files in any space management tool. There's typically a button that you can press that will just tell you the share of shelf. It's super easy to calculate. The downside is that it's kind of theoretical. This is the schematic of what ought to be at the shelf. It's not an actual like realogram, for lack of a better word. Also, you might not always get the files from the retailer. It kind of depends on your level of advisory. And so it might be useful for understanding share of shelf within one retailer, but for a market level aggregation, it can be pretty tricky. And because planograms are only updated once, twice a year, it's not an ongoing metric, which means linking it to time series data like POS or shipment data isn't really possible to understand, like the causal impact of retail execution on sales. So that would be one method. The second is just doing a retail audit at whatever cadence makes sense for your business, whether this is through your own field team or through a merchandiser. The big benefit here is you're getting an accurate assessment of kind of the real world of what shoppers are actually seeing. There's a couple drawbacks, though. The first is that it's typically a small sample size because you can only get to so many stores. And when you extrapolate from a small sample size, you get a lot of bias in the data. So getting to rural stores is probably hard for retail teams, as an example. If you're out of stock at one store, that becomes much more significant as you scale it up. Also, different reps kind of interpret the same instructions in different ways. And so you end up with a different measurement process kind of per rep. And probably the biggest thing is it just takes these folks away from selling and merchandising, which is what they want to do. It's how they get their bonus. We worked with one customer where about 2 weeks of the year, they pull all the reps off the field to gather this kind of data. And those are 2 weeks that could be spent growing the business. The third solution we're seeing is what we just call image recognition dashboards. Computer vision has been around for a little while, and this gives you kind of a bespoke solution. So it's really great because it's automated, it's time series data. A lot of the bias kind of gets removed. It's expensive. Often these are delivered as kind of technology-enabled consulting solutions. And that bespoke nature of it being designed specifically for the way you want to calculate share of shelf and your definition of the category also means that that calculation logic doesn't translate into high data trust. Because it's not a neutral, objective, kind of third-party ongoing measurement, but it's been built bespoke for you, it's really hard to know if an external partner like a retailer can take that calculation seriously or if there's bias within it. And then, of course, you still need that field team to collect the photos. So multiple different methodologies. Everyone kind of relies on different things. Sales typically looks at anecdotal evidence. Category teams often use the planogram files. Merchandisers look at local execution. And the net result is we're all working off different standards of what share of shelf means, which essentially means nobody wins between the CPGs, the retailers, and the shoppers.
And you're kind of really leading nicely into my next question. You've already partially answered it, but I'm curious if you could dig in a little further. I mean, what are some of the consequences that are occurring within the industry for not having a common definition for both CPGs and retailers?
Yeah, it's mostly this data tug of war, right? The retailers are looking at POS data. The brands are looking at what they saw happen. And we spend a lot of time debating that. It leads to kind of mistrust in the data. There's obviously misaligned incentives with how things get calculated. That wasted time is time that's not spent improving the shopper experience. And so instead of discussing the shelf, we're kind of discussing all the nuances of the data. The path forward, of course, is to agree on sort of a shared industry standard, very similar to what we did with ACV. ACV used to be calculated kind of by yourself in lots of different ways. And in this case, we need to go from these kind of static one-off audits to continuous data collection, from manual entry to computer-driven algorithms that kind of remove that bias. And then from looking at a single planogram to looking holistically across retail, across geography, across category. And it's obviously very challenging to do, but we think it's really important.
So, I mean, some of the methods that you just outlined, I mean, they worked well enough, maybe not perfectly, but they worked well enough at retail for a long time. But there's been a lot of changes at retail that means that they're no longer as effective. You know, what are some of the changes within the broader environment that's just making them even less effective?
Yeah, I mentioned how planograms only get updated kind of episodically. That's not the way, markets work anymore. We heard a really interesting case study that has to do with sort of the new click and collect and kind of treating stores as distribution points from like a supply chain delivery standpoint, where if you sort of imagine you're building an app like Instacart, and as an engineer, you're trying to figure out, okay, well, which items have the highest conversion rate for a first-time user when we show it on the screen? We want them to build that basket and get through the checkout as quick as possible. Well, as the AI kind of converges on its weight somewhere in the cloud, suppose it predicts a very specific SKU of Gain detergent in the laundry category, that if we show this, it is the highest conversion rate. Then separately, an engineer is working on second time and third time shoppers. How do we get them through the checkout? And they realize that just buy again, when you tap that button, is the fastest way to get you through. That shopping behavior is not how a shopper in store is going to evaluate the shelf. But what ends up happening is those Instacart shoppers come in to pick, and they're just taking that same item over and over again. Then it goes out of stock, and then it does impact. So even if you don't use an app like that, your in-store experience is impacted. And those calculations can just flip in an instant. So for folks designing planograms, like there's so many unintuitive challenges that have come from everything being digitized. I think that's like a kind of a notable case study, or a really interesting example.
You mentioned before, you were talking about shelf compliance as one of the challenges. So, want to double click on that. How does a lack of shelf compliance, how does that also impact the shopper experience and conversions?
Yeah, like compliance is interesting because it's a term you hear a lot about, but like shoppers don't feel non-compliance. They would just see a shelf that is like kind of hard to shop or a little bit messy. And, obviously there's a reason why we want compliance. There's typically a business case that backs it up with, sales improvement data. But it's really a missed opportunity to create a habit loop with shoppers where they're able to rely on the shelf as a reliable cue within their shopper experience. Often the way people shop, because you do it all the time, is sort of unconscious in a bit of a Zen state, kind of like when you're driving. And so when you snap folks out of that, sometimes it's good, but sometimes it's not. And I think one of the challenges with the traditional methods that we have for collecting data is we don't really know what it looks like. The way we've often talked about this is manufacturers have a really good sense of what leaves the warehouse through shipment data. For compliance reasons, they have to know down to the specific unit, like what got on a truck. But then it enters this black box where it's a little bit murky. Is it on that truck? Did it make it to a distribution center? Is it in a warehouse? Is it in the back room? Is it on a display or a shelf somewhere? And so what we do is we collect POS data to see how shoppers voted with their wallets and what kind of came out. But this is kind of like optimizing, this engine, but only ever being able to evaluate the inputs and the outputs. And then you sort of make predictions of what happened inside. What we think needs to happen is to take that off and create a novel data set. Maybe we call it retail execution data that can be married up with shipment data and POS data, so that for the first time you could get all the qualitative context of what's actually happening in that interstitial step between shipment and POS data. And of course, if we can do that, you can improve the shopper experience for everybody.
when we were, building out the information for this program, we were talking a lot about a programmatic or an AI-driven approach to this. So I want to, clarify what that means through the lens of this conversation. What is a programmatic approach to share of shelf, and what makes this approach different from some of the others?
Yeah, it really means like end-to-end automation, all the way from data capture to seeing that pie chart. The way that we've been thinking about it is first getting really good at actually capturing the whole planogram. So this means that you have a representative sample of stores across the retail network. That includes all the different set sizes and geographies and banners that are important to this category. Then, of course, it's guiding an understanding of where the category begins and ends, and making sure that you capture that entire aisle. The next thing we were able to do was actually use a model that Amazon open sourced to detect floors and ceilings. This is for warehouse automation robots that they can orient themselves. And through a bit of what's called segmentation, we can remove that and focus in on just the shelf. We were also able to use models. In this case, the technology is called monocular depth estimation. So from a single photo, trying to predict kind of a Z-axis or Z-axis. I'm giving away my Canadianism a little bit. But there's a garbage bag thingy in this photo. Often there's a freestanding display. You want to remove that so that the facings that are behind that don't impact the calculation. There's all sorts of other stuff at retail, pillars that you want to be able to detect, the actual shelves. But essentially, you want to be left with kind of a model of what the shelf actually looks like while detecting all of the individual facings. And so in this case, you'll kind of see how a photo turns into kind of a computer understanding. The next thing is then trying to understand, like, what is that actual cereal box? And the way that we're thinking about it is actually trying to automate how a human would do it. So I thought I'd get a little bit technical and just share a little bit about how the AI actually works. So the way humans do it is we use our neural network, our meat computer, our brain, and we generate a list of adjectives, words, to accurately describe something. So Lisa, suppose you haven't seen this Astro original yogurt. I might describe it to you with a big list of these words. The way that AI does it is it uses a similar neural network, a model, but run on silicon, and it generates weights instead of words. So these are floating points between 0 to 1. And believe it or not, they have meaning the same way that words would have meaning between us. And so for each facing that we get, we generate about 1,000 of these in order. And what's really interesting about them is when you reduce the dimensionality, say to 3, you can actually plot them. And this is a useful example here, just showing different concepts being embedded. They're called embeddings, those big arrays of floating points. And through clustering, you can calculate similarity. So something like an apple, might appear somewhere on the chart. Maybe right next to it is a banana and a pear. Google, which has nothing to do with an apple, is going to be somewhere else. But Apple, the company, would be sort of close to Google, but in the direction of like Apple, the fruit. So if you're kind of bearing with me, we take millions and millions of these facings, and we try to cluster them based on their meaning to automatically label them with a specific brand. And I'll just share kind of 2 more slides on this. This is a really hard problem. So I took this photo a few years ago of aggressive private label activity, in this case, targeting Aveeno. But we're trying to understand the meaning of each facing in an environment where sometimes the goal is to create some confusion. And I just want to share one last slide on the technical process that I thought was really interesting. This is an example of running a search on similarity within that 3D space. And the facing on the left of this President's Choice tea, when we asked the AI to kind of find that cluster, you'll see that a different brand from Celestial actually came back. And what's really cool about this is the AI actually understood the meaning of it and found a similar illustration of a Sumatran tiger. So there's a lot of funny nuance, of course, in retail. And in this case, it's teaching that actually, the brand is the part that's most interesting. So these are the technical problems we're working on. But of course, by removing humans from the process, it makes it unbiased, scalable, and trusted. And just one final piece with respect to the data collection, all of the photos that get taken are actually crowdsourced. So these are ordinary shoppers. And when it comes to retail execution analytics, and specifically share of shelf, you really want to see what your shoppers are actually seeing. Having worked with merchandisers and brokers and field teams, one of the funny things is that the photos that come back, it's kind of like how there's no ugly selfies on Instagram. Everything sort of feels a little bit like, did someone fix that shelf before they took the photo? I'd say like a universal customer experience once folks come onto Storesight is actually realizing how bad retail execution is. And that's great because these are easy opportunities to unlock quick growth. So you have to have scale and trust all the way from data collection to data calculation, and then all the analytics that come from that.
Yeah, no, you're definitely right about
technical, but
yeah, no, I appreciate the I think and our audience appreciates the education. I had to laugh when he talked about the selfies on Instagram, and I think there are a lot of people on LinkedIn who are very eager to showcase some of the gaps in retail execution and showcase where retailers need to improve. So we're going to dig into in a minute. I know you're going to walk us through an example of where having this information led to increased engagement with shoppers. But before we get to that, I would really love to get your input on how we can use this technology and this information to create stronger collaboration and trust between brands and retailers through a unified definition of share of shelf.
Yeah, so you could sort of imagine that maybe the most important thing when you meet with a retailer is the asterisks in the bottom left corner of where you got the data. And if it's from an owned tool where you did the calculation, sort of tricky. Back when I was working in CPG, sometimes I sort of felt like my job was to take the data, kind of spin it to make it seem like I ought to deserve more in-store support for my brands. We're the ones driving the category. And couldn't help but feel like when I would then meet with the buyer and leave and cross paths in the parking lot with my number one competitor, they probably had a brand manager doing the same thing, spinning the data in the opposite direction. And so what that does is it leads to low data trust because, the customer is just kind of seeing the same little asterisks, but with opposite charts. And so what's really important is that we move to something that's neutral and objective and third party. There's no agenda. And not only does it need to be, not only does it need to work, say, cross geography, cross retailer, but also cross category, right? One of the things we've been learning building share of shelf is every category does have nuance, but we need to resist the temptation of creating a different metric for each category. I thought I'd just kind of share some examples, though, of why it's important for an AI model to be exposed to those edge cases in order to build that trust. So just a couple photos that have come up in the real world. On the left, you'll see how shelf-ready packaging can sort of confuse an AI trying to understand which brands are what or which facings are what. In the middle, you'll see kind of dummy products. These are like laminated pieces of paper. And so we have to interpret that. Security covers. So in certain geographies, there's regulation around over-the-counter products being sold within a proximity to a pharmacist. And when that person leaves, they close this little shelf garage door. And so if a shopper comes up, how do you calculate share of shelf on that? You've got plastic pushers that might actually look like a different brand, see-through shelving, where a product on a bottom shelf is coming through because of an out of stock on the shelf above that. Mirrors are really common in refrigerated categories. This almost looks like a magician's trick. So sometimes can even fool a human. And then just three other quick examples, reflective surfaces everywhere where you might accidentally double count the number of facings, irregular packaging, even like product demos or situations where a shopper is sort of being enticed to interact with it. Are we sort of counting that towards share of shelf and on-shelf availability? So what needs to happen is a model to be exposed to every edge case in every category at huge scale. And right now, we're at a level of scale where we get a new photo from retail about every second. So you're to take all the photos we collect, divided by like number of seconds in a month. That's kind of where we're at. And so no one's got a better data set to train this model. And we just feel like we're poised to introduce an industry standard that adds enough weight to that asterisk that we can all kind of get on the same page.
Can you talk us through one of those examples of where these shelf visibility insights led to a better understanding of shoppers engaging with the category?
Yeah, we one of the most powerful analyses that you can do is just to say, okay, like who's my top performing retailer? Who's my bottom performing retailer? And now let me just have a look at the planogram. You know, what does the first one have in common? What does the second one have in common? We were working with a snacking company, and in bars, just with the natural evolution of consumer trends over time, the category had evolved from an initial bifurcation in the path to purchase of organic versus inorganic to kids versus adults. Obviously, initially, kids was sort of this nascent, novel category, but as it had grown and become its own 4-foot section, shoppers started to shop that way. And the manufacturer felt like maybe that was their worst performing retailer because the buyer hadn't updated the layout of the shelf to reflect the way that shoppers are now shopping. And it's kind of the hidden in plain sight where people just aren't finding them. And that's a really hard thing to gather data on and communicate. But in this case, the manufacturer was able to bring that insight to the retailer, as well as what competitive planograms look like, and talk about how it's not just share of shelf, but also shelf quality as an important metric. And you know, I think often product performance is misdiagnosed, where if a brand or a specific SKU isn't selling well, hey, maybe it's a pricing issue. Maybe it's a product issue and we need to like rationalize it or reformulate or something like that. But in many cases, it's just a visibility issue. People can't find it. And so thinking about the path to purchase and thinking about kind of how the assortment gets reflected on a shelf can often lead to new ways of influencing a retailer to just delay things out to drive better conversion on your brand.
Great. So we have been getting some questions in. We're going to move into the Q&A. I want to encourage people, if you have any more questions, keep dropping them in. If for some reason we're not able to get to them, we can follow up after the webinar. But before we move into the Q&A, Bram, just want to, you know, for those who are watching, where can attendees learn more about some of the things that we've discussed today? Where do you encourage them to reach out to?
Yeah, I've got a slide from our sales team here. So yeah, you can just go to storesight.com and book a demo and have a look at the technology. We're also going to be introducing a white paper. So as part of pushing sort of an industry standard, we thought, well, if it's going to be a standard, we have to build that data trust. And so we're kind of just being really open source with how everything is going to be shared. We're going to show exactly how the calculations work. It's about 6,000 words, but it's a really good read. And that'll be available for free to download on our website. You don't even have to put in anything. You know, we think that just sharing this information as kind of like a bit of a vision on where the industry should go is really important. So you can talk to the sales team once the white paper's out, I'm sure through Path to Purchase and the other Ensemble IQ brands will be pushing that out.
Okay. So I have some questions, just going to go through them. So I have someone here, they're calling it, you know, this idea of standardizing the metric, a great idea, but they are wondering how how do you think it's going to be institutionalized with IRI and Nielsen are interested drivers for their own product? And I understand your response isn't necessarily going to be directed towards those two organizations, but as examples of, there are some organizations with vested interest in their own standards.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I suppose we would start by doing a webinar with you, Lisa, to get the word out, which is what we're doing.
Great idea.
Yeah, and then getting questions like that, right? So I think the thing that's characterized our development is like ongoing customer engagement. I mean, pretty much every feature we've built has just been a request from a specific person in industry. You know, not just those organizations. I think there's a lot of companies where when you have an idea, it ends up as like an IT ticket assigned to a junior person. It just kind of goes into the abyss. You never hear about it. That's not really the approach that we're taking. So our roadmap is like entirely informed by kind of how folks are using the product and what they want to do with it. So it's probably introducing what we think is right, but then just listening to customers and iterating with them. As an example, we couldn't really decide, does it make sense to calculate share of shelf by facings or by space? We were getting actually some pretty mixed feedback from industry. So we just settled on a little toggle, and you can pick which one you want. I think some of those product decisions will just organically come, but creating an industry standard is hard. Like, there's a big vision, and it only really comes through consensus. So, hopefully we're onto something, but if you have any ideas to make it better, let me know.
Sounds good. Well, listen, everyone who's listening, if you had feedback, drop it in now or follow up with Bram after. So we did get quite a number of questions. I think some people appreciated the technical information. So we have one question, if you'd like to address, does the depth of each column calculated, is it through vision analytics?
Depth being like how many items are kind of in stock? Is that,
I think so.
Probably
Yeah.
that's what it
That's
means.
how I would interpret it, yeah.
We don't. We actually have a separate AI that looks at on-shelf availability. Interestingly, when we think about share of shelf, of course, if you're looking at a planogram file, it assumes everything's in stock. That's not really the case. And even if everything's in stock, you may not just have distribution at a retailer or a subset of their locations. So essentially, the way we're thinking about it is as a composite metric of three things, right? It's share of shelf times on-shelf availability times distribution. At the aggregate market level, that would be your share of shelf. So share of shelf times OSA times distribution. You can, of course, filter down to just a retailer or a geography or something to look at it any way you want. But the reason we settled on that is because that's what the shopper sees, right? There's not a lot of consolation to a shopper in saying, well, yeah, I know I'm out of stock, but that is my slot. I own that share. No, can't buy your product. Your share shelf isn't that. So we take real world measurements, and that composite metric is how we're defining share shelf.
Okay, so we have someone here, they've noted retail execution equals in-store implementation. Do you advocate tracking merchandising tasks as they are performed?
No. Our platform surfaces just the ground truth of what folks are seeing. Typically, then there's two paths to resolve retail execution issues. One would be through a head office call, which is really, I think, where a lot of our customers currently rely on the platform. So, for example, we have an amazing PowerPoint export that lets you just kind of take the data and go right into a meeting. The other would, of course, be through sending folks in to fix the issue. And we do have a lot of customers who have invited their merchandiser onto the platform for, there's an emerging capability around dynamic routing. So it doesn't make sense to send someone to stores where everything's great, instead send them to ones where it's bad. But going back to this idea, right, of you have your shipment data, you have your POS data. Right now, what should be happening is you should be getting some kind of an alert in your business where, hey, we shipped a bunch of product into a retailer. We're not yet seeing it on the shelf. So trigger the merchandiser to go into these specific stores and pull it out of the back room before we get negative POS data. Because then you could actually avoid that report and it would just be positive. And that would be really cool. But this data set doesn't really exist just yet. So we're building it.
We could do webinar 2.0 when that is here.
Yeah.
We have someone is asking, what role does the category captain play?
Yeah, I think a huge role. And I think that with tools like ours, there's now sort of this opportunity for the informal captain. I'll just share a really cool case study. This is maybe my favorite one we've had. We had a manufacturer who, for the last 10 years, they had a kind of an existential goal to win advisory with Walmart and become category captain. They had been unsuccessful, and they got on our platform, and they reached out to their buyer and said, hey, do you remember before the pandemic, we used to do store checks together? It was so fun. nobody does it anymore, right? We're all so busy. We'd love to do it with you. And we know that like every third Thursday in your calendar, you have this half-hour block called store checks. We also know something comes up, you cancel it every time. Tell you what, don't cancel that. We're going to send you a Teams invite. We'll curate that store tour for you. And so they would go on our platform, open up a couple tabs, and walk the buyer through what's happening in her stores and her competitor stores. No selling, right? Just talking about the category, talking about the shopper, talking about ideas. After the first meeting, the buyer said something cool. She said, hey, this was a great use of my time. I learned a lot. Thanks for organizing it. Let's do it again next month. But next month, can you focus on these 3 things that have been keeping me up at night? By the kind of 6-month mark, they started getting phone calls in between the regularly scheduled cadence of meetings with quick questions like, hey, what's the price of this item right now, my competitor? It was almost as though the official captain was in the room with the buyer, but the buyer's on the phone with this unofficial captain. And by the end of the year, they had won captaincy, which was really cool. And that's a playbook that everyone can do. So I think the role of the captain is still like very, very important, but it's also a huge opportunity because this data was always siloed. And now that it's available, it's not necessarily protected by captaincy. So if there are other vendors that want to step up, like this is a really kind of rich moment to do that.
Someone's asking how you handle varying set sizes from store to store.
It's a good question. So you can just filter based on it, basically. Actually, it's such a good point. Back when I was in CPG, I was once looking at a retailer where sales were flat on my brand. And then I dug into it and found out that I was actually growing in the small set and I was losing in the large set. And through the tyranny of averages, I was flat. In that case, I actually did try to do a store check and ended up at like a medium-sized format, which was totally useless. So yeah, on our platform, you can just filter by set size and then figure out what the small set has in common versus the large set. And if you can bring that insight to the other one, you can maybe drive some easy growth on your business.
So someone wants to know, I think it's a good question, for within center store, makes a lot of sense within that layout, but can you talk about how it can be applied to perimeter stores, such as the produce, where the planograms are more fluid and they're often shifting?
Produce. I've learned a lot about produce since getting into this. Produce, yeah, okay, I'll admit produce is unique, very interesting. I'll share an interesting case study that we had in produce that like probably wouldn't work in other categories, but we have this really advanced way of doing text search. So you can actually query the platform for photos that have any text contained within the photo. We initially built it to support shopper marketing teams that were trying to find like specific freestanding displays. But some very clever folks in produce figured out that they could search for country of origin and actually from that understand the supply chain of how the retailer is currently getting that commodity. And in some cases, actually use that information to then predict pricing and better negotiate with retailers. So we've developed a couple kind of, I'd say, like unique use cases specific to produce where, yes, some of this technology would not apply, but it's worth chatting with someone on our team just to learn more about how we're signing up all these produce companies now. It's great. But yes, some of this is totally irrelevant to produce.
Okay. So you should have some more case studies soon, it sounds like. Okay, yeah. I think we're going to do one last question. And then again, if anyone has any final ones, feel free to drop them in and Bram can follow up after the webinar. But so can you expand on tracking promotions and promotional execution? It's a 2-part question. Also, do you capture end caps?
Yes. So our process is we start in the main section, we go from the left to the right, capture the whole aisle. Then the instructions are actually to look at the entire footprint of the store and take a picture of every secondary display. So this is any out of section placement, which includes end caps, freestanding displays, bunkers. In say confection in the holiday season, there might just be a second planogram or the checkout area. We capture all of it. The other ways that we look at promotional stuff, like one of the really cool things we're actually building is a binary classification model that can predict whether or not a price is a temporary reduced price or some sort of an offer. So we work with a lot of revenue growth management teams to understand pricing. Something that always bugged me with pricing from the POS companies is that you get a blended like 4-week average price at the channel level, which I was always like, okay, I don't have a salesperson who calls on GB plus MM. And also like my price is not $641. No shopper ever saw that. It's like $699 and $599 and it all gets averaged, you know? Yeah. So we just tell you like, okay, this is the actual price of this product at this specific store at this time. And, you know, there's some challenges with our pricing data, but it's pretty awesome if you're really interested in promo.
Nice. Okay. So I am afraid that is all the time we have today. So I need to go ahead and wrap things up. Bram, I want to thank you so much for joining us, giving us your time, your subject matter expertise, just really great education into what's possible. So thank you so much for joining us.
Cool. Thanks, Lisa.
I want to thank Storesight for sponsoring today's webinar. And just as a reminder, once again, the recording will be available on demand today on p2pi.com. And thank you to our attendees for giving us your time today. Hope you found it valuable.